Now, a report for the Centre for Media Monitoring, which is some kind of affiliation with the British Council of Muslims, has done this big 54-page report basically concluding that GBNews hates Muslims and is Islamophobic. Apparently, we've accounted for half of UK news channels' coverage about Muslims and Islam. Apparently, they say we have negative portrayals that regularly demonise the belief of Muslims. Well, I've got to say, I myself come up in this report multiple times over, and I have issues with this report, ladies and gents. I feel that this report deliberately, I would argue, takes comments out of context. It strips context out, and sometimes it deliberately tells untruths. Let's look at some of these. Listen to this clip. With about Sir Keir Starmer's speech. I've got a few issues with it, actually, and we'll go through them. So basically what he was saying was he was condemning the violence that was displayed to police officers, property, religious worship places, so on and so forth. He's quite right to condemn that. He shouldn't be doing those things. It is wrong. He was then also, I would argue, basically suggesting that anyone quite frankly, that goes out, that has concerns, that goes onto the street, is angry, is essentially far right. And he was talking very tough about clamping down. He's going to set up this new, kind of national policing unit. He's going to leverage things like facial recognition. It carries on. So let's have a look at some other examples. That white working-class Britons have the audacity to take to the streets about something that they're passionate about. Boom, out comes the "we're really tough on you." So now, in this report, what they actually do is completely omit any mention of me, completely and clearly saying that setting fire to places of worship, abusing police and so on and so forth, that is wrong behaviour. There's not a sane-minded individual in the land that would actually celebrate and think that that behaviour is right. It is not right. It is absolutely wrong. And these are the points that I make regularly. That bit, though, doesn't actually make it into the report. It continues. It's about what it is, because it's not extreme Buddhists, is it? It's extreme Islamist people that have an extreme ideology about how they want this country to look, operate and run, and what belief system they want people to adhere to. And that is being having a blind eye turned against it.
Is that what they're protesting over, though?
Well, and this is where it becomes interesting.
This is where it's heading, and I actually think we need a law that explicitly says that no one can conduct, in any walk of life in the United Kingdom, Sharia law, because that is where this is heading, and it's really bad news. And frankly, we want to keep religion out of politics, because otherwise you see this sectarianism. You're right about the context, but when that happens, generally it ends in extreme tension, extreme divisions, violence and death.
Now, that last conversation, which, Aaron, you were actually part of, that last conversation, this report has written up as follows. This is a direct quote. Following the election of 4 independent MPs in the 2024 general election, GBNews presenters described this as an example of sectarian politics. Michelle Dewberry, described them as extreme Islamists that have an extreme ideology about how they want this country to look, operate and run. So I'll say that again. This report says that after, this is following the election of the 4 independent MPs, that, what I've just played you on the screen, is what I then said. It suggests, or doesn't suggest, it directly says that I called these 4 MPs extreme Islamists. That conversation, which is what they refer to, point 1, took place in February, months before the election was even announced, never mind, had taken place and concluded and elected said people. That's my first point. My second point, the conversation that we were having, Aaron Bastani, myself and Richard Tice, was actually on the backdrop of some utterly horrendous scenes in British Parliament where Lindsay Hoyle had got involved. Can you remember this, with the ceasefire votes? And there was reference to threats, intimidation, when people were trying to have these votes. Lindsay Hoyle, he came out the next day and said that he didn't want to be in a situation where he was taking a phone call to say that an MP had been murdered by a terrorist. That was what we was talking about then. We were talking about the extreme intimidation of MPs to try and influence the outcome of the democracy in this country. That is what we were referring to. Absolutely nothing to do with post-general election, these people that were then subsequently elected. So my summary point is, I find this report deliberately misleading. I disagree with so many of their outcomes. I find this very damaging. There's many people out there that don't need any encouragement at all to dislike GBNews and or the presenters within it. This has been picked up, this report, and extrapolated out all over the place. Aaron Bastani, your own publication, Novara Media, you say, or your publication says, that we are basically a factory of Islamophobia. You published an article today, your publication produced an article today, says GBNews hates Muslims, and now we have the receipts. It's an obsession. In that article, again, it repeats the claims that I described rioters as white working class normal Brits, basically. Again, completely overlooking the fact that no, I did not. I clearly distinguished between rioters and people that were ordinary working class Brits taking to the streets of Britain. Where are you on this issue?
So, I mean, I read the report today. It's not especially long. I do recommend people actually read it for themselves. Always the case with this stuff. It's, I think, 54 pages.
It is.
The methodology they have in terms of mentioning or the various channels in this country mentioning Muslims is interesting. So they're saying that GBNews is responsible for almost half of the mentions of Muslims. Of course, there are only 3 permanent news channels running in the UK, so it's going to be rather high. What caught my attention was this figure, though. Yes, GBNews mentions Muslims 18,200 times. The BBC mentions Muslims 15,200 times. So that in itself doesn't really tell me very much. Sky 9,500 times. There's obviously a big difference between Sky and the BBC. What, however, Michelle, from the report which I read, I did find shocking, was several quotes. And these are quotes. One is from Calvin Mackenzie. This is a quote here. Islam Muslims, the Muslim voters, are organising the Labour Party. They, Labour, have to bow at the knee to Muslims. Now, if you replace that with Jews, I think we would all agree that's an anti-Semitic comment. The same with Simon Evans. There is a worrying grip, like, let's say, with Islam, which Islamic pressure groups, Islamic interests have on the Labour Party. Again, change that for Jews. I think we would agree that's anti-Semitic. Here's David Starkey. The 2 groups that are most likely to be powerfully anti-Semitic are certain groups of Muslims and certain groups of blacks, and they're absolutely entrenched in the Labour Party. Again, if you change that, if you said that powerful groups of Jews are responsible for anti-black sentiment and they're entrenched in the Labour Party, you would say that's anti-Semitic. So, for me, what was really powerful in the report, like I said, I didn't really agree much with the methodology, the quantitative methodology of the numbers and the mentions, but those quotes are striking, and I would suspect that you would think they're not particularly tasteful.
People say things all the time that are distasteful, and that is an element of free speech. The context, I don't know, for what you've just described. I would like to know, what is the context that these conversations were had? What was the pushback from the presenters? What was the pushback from the other guests? Because what happens on this channel, we have conversations that don't take place in isolation. They take part as part of discussions and debates with all different viewpoints and perspectives and all the rest of it. So do you stand by Novara Media's tweet that calls GBNews an engine of Islamophobia?
That's the title of this article.
Yeah, I'm asking you what another title. Do you?
And Novara Media is reporting a report. It's relaying the findings of a report by the Centre for Media Monitoring. Yeah. So that's not a Novara report. It's reporting a claim that's made elsewhere.
This is a report that you've put, that your publication has tweeted, and your guys have called it GBNews is an engine of Islamophobia. I'm asking you. You work here. You've been here for, well, you don't work here, but you're on this programme. Yeah. You've been on this programme for a long time. You've been on other programmes. Do you think that that is an accurate statement?
I would say the quotes I just told you a moment ago, I think those are Islamophobic quotes.
That's not what I asked.
No, hold on, Michelle. Let me.
GBNews is an engine of Islam.
No, because I want to be fair and accurate, and I think your viewers have seen me on here. I try to be fair. I've never heard from you on this show, I've come on many times, I've never heard you say anything remotely as Islamophobic. Given your mention 9 times in the report, I think that's a reasonable retort. I don't watch GB News enough to say things one way or the other. I would say this. Kelvin McKenzie said something there that, frankly, I don't think the BBC would platform, because the BBC has a different approach to these debates. Right, and that's something GB News will say that's our brand, but that's also the facts of the matter,
and
right?
This is the question that I have, like, what is the context? Because when this report directly quotes me and states that after the general election, Michelle Dewberry called elected MPs extreme Islamists, when they say that, and actually the reality is, what I actually did is many months before, when we were talking about a situation where MPs had been threatened with violence, where the Speaker of the House had to change parliamentary order, he says, because he was so terrified that MPs would be murdered by terrorists, his words, not mine, then actually I would say that the people performing that behaviour are indeed extreme Islamists, full stop. That has nothing to do with, fast forward, multiple months later, referring to a separate elected members of parliament. This report is an absolute disgrace. It's inaccurate, it's dishonest, and it's deceitful. And I wonder why, because it's quite sinister. People hate GB News, and they are deliberately trying to make us a target for, I would say, quite extreme responses. I've seen some of the threats that have come my way as a result of this, and to the result of the other presenters. And people need to be very careful when they are suggesting falsehoods to further their own narratives, particularly when it causes people direct or has the potential to direct harm. Alice, very quick response from you, because I'm almost out of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's tricky to talk about it sitting on this panel. I wouldn't be here if I thought GB News was an engine for Islamophobia. I did read this report. It read to me like it had reached its conclusion before it did its research. I thought there was a lot of snobbery in it. I remember Gavin Esler in his introduction saying he was tasked with watching GB News for a month and he lasted about an hour because he found it too appalling. I think that's dripping with snobbery. I think there are some points that I hope that GB News is taking into account around Muslim representation on panels like this, around some stereotyping language. But yeah, overall, I think that reports like this is targeting this channel because they don't like it.
Muslims are welcome on this panel and on the channel more generally, as are any other religious group and faith and all the rest of it. We absolutely proactively do not discriminate. I find Muslims, Youssef actually, on this programme towards the end of the break, towards the end of the week. But for now, that's all I've got time for. Have a good night.